I want to talk to you about the way that you guys are using computing power and technology to change the way design works. Design used to be, when I think of the way buildings were made, it was sort of like a game of Battleship, where you'd sort of test something by sort of building it and see if it worked, and guessing if this would be a problem, or you build a model or something. No longer.
Yeah, you know, it used to have that sense of one iteration after another, and you test and you test, and you, like Battleship, you say D2, and the answer comes back and say miss. And that's kind of changing. Given how much computing power we have, we can now actually build digital prototypes of almost everything. So before building your physical prototype, you do the same thing, but you do it with bits instead of atoms.
And those physical prototypes aren't just about seeing how it looks. It's literally about testing the strength of the building materials and the wind shear and all this other stuff.
Yeah, it's about really understanding the performance of the thing you're going to build before you actually commit to doing it.
So what's the fundamental technological change that makes that possible?
It's really the emergence of computing power, you know, at an unprecedented level. Starts with what happened on the desktop with the microprocessor, but what really changes all of a sudden, cloud computing, where you have this infinitely scalable resource. As much computing power as I need at any point in time, I can bring to bear on that problem.
So an architectural firm that builds skyscrapers and only really needs to max out the power of the engine once or twice a year when they build their biggest buildings can essentially rent that time somewhere else, send the processing out to be done overnight, and come back and see how strong the building is.
Yeah, exactly.
Make those changes.
Yeah, so if it's the structural analysis of a skyscraper, if it's crash testing on an automobile, if it's understanding the aerodynamics of a new plane, if it's understanding new materials like carbon fiber, how strong it is, when it will break, how long it'll last, all of those are questions that can be answered.
Does that fundamentally change the shape of things? I mean, are designers recognizing that with all of this and the different kinds of materials available to them, they can quite literally change the shape of buildings, not just to follow or buildings or whatever, to follow a design concept, but to sort of follow what's possible, I don't know, aerodynamically or structurally or so on?
Sure, you're starting to see it in automobiles. You're seeing it very clearly in airplanes. You know, if you look at the 787,
right,
if you look at the wings of that were made out of composites, all of a sudden you're seeing a shape that would have been probably impossible.
Well, the wings literally tilt up as it
exactly.
flies.
Possible because the composites wouldn't have been able to be done with aluminum.
And yet, you know, that's also a classic example of design compromise, that they initially proposed a very different looking plane, but the airports couldn't handle it.
Right.
They could have had a maybe even a better, faster, lighter, more, you know, a plane that would have used less fuel, but they wouldn't have anywhere to land it.
Yeah, you know what often happens with new technology is, often when we develop a new technology, we as a civilization try to replicate the stuff of the old. You try to do the same thing with the new stuff. Then all of a sudden, you know, you kind of get your sea legs under you and say, no, we can do something different. In fact, maybe we can do something very different.
About very different. So earlier in the show, Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen were having this spirited debate about the notion of innovation.
Yeah.
And you and I have talked about this, that some companies, when they try to innovate, they appoint a person in charge.
Yeah. I think that's a silly way to go about it. You know, for me,
well, your line to me once was, you can tell a company's not innovative if they have a chief innovation officer.
I stand by what I said.
Why?
Because the two things I see wrong is it's not one person's responsibility to be innovative. The other thing is, I don't think it's something that you can do routinely. It's not like all of a sudden you can go to innovation school. I think it's much more fundamental. It's deeply baked into the culture. And it really starts with who you hire, and you have to get the right people. You know, and so sometimes the analogy I use is like to the basketball team. You know, like if you were starting a basketball team and you wanted the best shooters, you could either start with Kobe on your team, you know, or whoever your favorite is, or you could take someone who's mediocre and say, you know, I'm going to appoint you, you know, the chief shooting officer. I'm going to say, you know, and I'm going to put you to school and I'm going to teach you the process and I'll show you the mechanics. The best thing you can do when you want to be innovative and creative is hire the best and smartest people and develop a culture that encourages and rewards innovation.